Hey everybody, this is Devin Francis, also known as Leonard Meltzner.
And it's Victoria.
And you're watching episode 67 of the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast here in
67!
My new room. Like, I've gone through so many rooms over the course of this podcast, it's crazy.
I'm still in the same room.
Alright, what are we talking about today, Victoria?
So we're going to be reviewing OAC's episode of the month, definitely this month, not a different month,
Of course.
To the Ends of the Earth, and then afterwards we're going to be reviewing Wit's Flop, which is the first episode of all of Adventures in Odyssey.
Yes. Alright, so let's get right into things. Episode 770, To the Ends of the Earth, written by Nathan Hubler. What's it about, Victoria?
So in this episode we have Whit and Jason going to, I can't remember where they were. Papua New Guinea?
No, it's actually different than Papua New Guinea. I found out. I didn't know.
Okay. So they're going to that place, and they're handing out Bibles. And then one of the people there says that an evil spirit is going to get very angry at them if they indulge in Christianity and they turn the tribe against the original gods. So then this guy kind of like messes up all their stuff, and in the end, everything's okay. And it's about...
You just skipped 97% of the
You were like
episode.
this!
Well, yeah, because you're taking too long in the first 2 minutes, and then you just cut
Fine.
out the other 23.
He ends up injuring himself trying to sabotage their stuff. Jason and him end up in like a hospital infirmary thing together, and they have to try and get malaria pills before Jason dies.
Well, I think the point of the episode is that he injures himself, and despite the fact that he was doing it trying to sabotage them, they put their lives on the line to try and save his life after he injures himself.
Yeah.
Which is the point that you didn't say, but...
Well, you told me to hurry up.
Alright, so this episode starts off with Jeff Lewis.
Jeff
He's
was in
like
this episode. Devin had already
everywhere
listened
now.
to it. So then I started it, and Devin's like, listen to the episode. I started it, and then all of a sudden I was like, Jeff! And that's all I sent him on Skype for the next, 23 minutes.
Yeah, so it starts off with Whit and Jason and Jeff together, and I was like...
And then we have, Jeff, and then, Jeff. And so Whit and Jason are about to go down, and then Jeff's like, oh, I have to go somewhere else, but first, let's pray. And then I assume, Whit's gonna pray, or Jason's gonna pray. And then Jeff is just like, I'll pray. And then I'm just like... And then Jeff starts praying, and the whole time, both the times I listen to this episode when Jeff is praying, I'm sitting there, and I'm like, I'm so proud of him.
So he doesn't actually appear very much in this episode. He basically just drops them off in Papua.
And then he's at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So shout out to when Jason used to be a missionary way back in the day.
Yeah.
So that was
I can't
nice to
believe
get
that they actually had an episode about Jason doing missionary things like he's supposed to, instead of doing secret agent things. I like that. They didn't mention secret agent stuff at all in this episode.
Yeah, and they didn't only put him in missionary stuff, but they actually made specific reference to the fact that he used to do mission stuff all the time. I was quite surprised at that. So, as Victoria said before, we are in Papua in this episode. So at this rate, I think the OAC is going to cover the whole of the globe in not too long. We've been to a lot of countries now. So it felt very Prisoners of Fear to me right at the beginning. I was guessing that the mystic guy was going to start sabotaging things to provoke people, and like a go beer kind of thing, set fire to this, oh no, it's the ancient gods are angry and all
Every
this
single
kind of
time
stuff.
Jason has a missionary episode, the people are always against him. Every single missionary episode he's in, and every single time I think of Shining Armor, the episode, and I always have flashbacks to that, and that episode always really annoyed me the first couple times I listened to it. I don't mind it as much now, but every single time I hear a Jason missionary episode, I'm kind of like, But I really, really liked this episode.
So, as Victoria said before, the bad guy here, he injures himself trying to sabotage Whit and Jason in the pastor's tent. And when we say he injures himself...
Oh my gosh.
He tripped and fell on his own machete, puncturing his lung somehow.
I remember first time I listened to it, and also this morning when I listened to it, because I totally forgot about that. I'm just sitting there, and it's like, he tripped, and he fell, and I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, on his own machete, and I'm just like... And then they're like, and it punctured his lung, and I'm just like... First bleeding from the eyeballs, now we have machete tripping and puncturing his lung.
How could you possibly be so clumsy to trip and fall and impale yourself on your own machete? Like, that sounds like quite a feat.
It's like running with scissors. It's like walking with your machete. You have to hold it in a way that's not gonna trip and puncture your lung when you're walking.
This is the cautionary tale for why you don't run with scissors. You're gonna trip and puncture your lung. Yeah. Speaking of gruesome deaths, I was like, maybe this is how Whit'll die, from malaria. He's gonna die out in the jungles of Papua.
Jason's making me paranoid, man, and he's just like, do you forget about this? Do you forget about your malaria pills? And I'm like, what else is Whit forgetting? And Whit's like, I already took them. I'm like, oh, okay.
Did you feel like...
They're trying to take Whit out of the country. They're going to kill him in the OAC.
I know.
And then Odyssey's going to start up, and then everyone's going to be like, Whit is dead. And all the fans are going to be like, what the heck?
People would not be happy about that.
That would be so funny, though. It wouldn't be funny if it was you. It'd be funny if it was someone else.
Did you think that was a callback to life expectancy and Jason, worrying about Whit's health and to Ties That Bind as well?
I thought of Ties That Bind. I didn't think of life expectancy. Now I am. Now I'm sad all over again.
With Jason and Whit and talking about going to the hospital and stuff like that.
Life expectancy, the scene with Whit and Jason is one of my favorite. It's ranked in my top 10 scenes in all of Odyssey. It's just so good. Such a good scene.
So, the guy that they're trying to help, whose name I don't seem to have written down that I can see around.
Go Beer. Just call him Go Beer.
No, I can't. Because once he finally wakes up in the jungle, I was like, wow, this guy was a lot nastier than I thought he was. Like, I thought he was just trying to turn the people towards him, sabotage little stuff like Gobier did. But he was actively trying to kill Whit and Jason.
He took their malaria pills. They're like, oh no, at least we have bug spray. No, we don't have bug spray. Okay, let's grab the malaria pills. He took them, so we're all gonna die.
Yeah. And he'd already swapped them out, to put poison. He'd already put that other lady, the regular missionary there, was in the hospital because he swapped her pills out with, something else that made her sick. And he was trying to kill her, but he was like, I tried to kill her, but the helicopter came and took her to the hospital instead.
I don't like him. I don't like him at all.
So, he wasn't even trying to send her away by sending her to the hospital. He was trying to make her die there in the jungle. So, yikes.
I really love the scene at the beginning when they're, passing around the Bibles, and it's like, oh, that's so sweet. And then Frollo comes in, and he's just like, hey, everybody, don't do this. And it's like, gosh darn it. Where's, a pit of fire where you can fall in while holding onto the gargoyle or something like that? Leave.
Good way to nail home the lesson of this episode, Victoria.
Thank you. Yeah, so, I know I'm completely missing the lesson as I'm saying this. I know what I'm doing.
So, yeah, I was really shocked by how, actively bad he was. But, obviously that only drives home the point even more of how significant their love was then by juxtaposition that they showed him makes it even stronger. So,
I might not like him, but that doesn't mean I want him to get impaled. If he got impaled,
you just want him to fall into a pit of fire.
We gotta get you to the hospital or something like that. And there's I took your malaria pills. They're like, gosh darn it, we still gotta get you to a hospital even though you're a jerk.
A jerk, yeah.
I would do the same thing. I'd be like, you're a jerk, but I'm not gonna let you die on my watch.
Just attempted murder jerk.
Yeah.
It felt to me like there was an unrealistic number of people speaking English. I know that we need to understand what's going on, but they specifically included a line earlier about how there was, back at this point, back when, I think it was when Jason was there before, there was only one guy who spoke English well. And this can't be so much later that now the entire village is fluent in English. So I thought it was odd that they do that when they chose to include a line specifically earlier talking about how there's only one guy who could speak English properly.
They made it sound like a lot of time passed, but I really wish they clarified how much time passed.
Well, it can't be like decades and decades, because Jason...
Yeah, I know.
It was when Jason was there.
But they made it sound like a really long time. Like, they're like, oh, when I was here last time, there's only one Christian. And then they come back and it's like the entire town, except for Frollo, is like a Christian.
Yeah, but that can happen in a couple of years. But the entire town learning an entire different language family, like, well...
Did they have, like, any Bibles? Because I don't think they said.
No.
Because I know they were, like, delivering them in their language, but they didn't say if they had any English ones.
No, I guess someone would have spoken English. That's a good point. Cause
so, like,
but they might not have, they probably wouldn't have been able to read English, though.
No, I'm saying, like, what if they had, like, he started teaching them English so he could read to them in the Bible? So, like, they didn't completely understand it, but they could get up, like, the basics.
Oh,
so by the
the
time they get the Bibles, they're like,
sweet,
this is in my language.
To them. Because otherwise there was no one there, but that missionary lady was there. Maybe she read the Bible to them.
Maybe they pulled a Prisoners of Fear and they're actually speaking another language the entire time. Which I always forget whenever I'm listening to Prisoners of Fear.
I know,
that they're
right?
not actually speaking English.
I know. That always blows my mind.
It's always like really, really impressive.
It is impressive. When you think about how little time Eugene and Katrina had to learn that episode.
You go to Eugene in Cross of Cortez, and he's just like, no hablo español, aquí, la porta. And you're like, how did you learn an African tribe Ashanti language, but you can't learn basic Spanish? I don't understand.
Well, I think he had a little more time to learn the Ashanti language, but
yeah, I know.
Whatever.
It's just like, oh, we're on the run today, honey. What should we do? Let's learn the Ashanti language.
It is a good point, especially considering, like, if Eugene's that good at learning languages, like, he already speaks French and Latin, so Spanish should not be that big of a stretch.
Yeah, I know.
Comparatively speaking.
Is it just like this one thing? I wish they brought that up more in Odyssey. I wish it was a running joke. Like, Eugene knows, like, every single language in existence, except for he can't understand any Spanish whatsoever.
Okay, so, moving on. I really liked how, after Jason got hurt and he was in the hospital, like...
You like Jason getting hurt?
Whit starts, like, scolding Jason for being too active after he got injured. I'm like, sure, okay, Whit.
I wrote in my notes for that, and he's just like, Jason, you can't do this and this. And I was like, I ripped out my own IV and ran all the way.
Yeah, I thought you would.
And, yeah. And, what was I gonna say? Oh, yeah. So I was listening to the episode, and then Jason's climbing the tree, and I was just like, oh man, what's gonna happen with Jason climbing the tree? And then I looked at the album artwork. The album artwork, for those who don't know, is Jason falling out of a tree. Well, like, branches are snapping, and I'm like, well, that answers that question. Way to get rid of all suspense.
So that's all the notes I have about bits in the episode.
I really enjoyed this episode.
Do you have more things to say?
I like Jeff being in episodes. How many episodes has he been in now? I feel like
8,
about
I believe.
6. 8. What's main character status? 20?
Yes.
We need him in more. We need him in more, like, episodes that aren't
OAC. Like, public, yeah. Okay.
How many has he been in canon? Like, 5?
It would be, many. What if he's been in 8, 4 of those would be, yeah, he's been in 4 public ones, and then
close.
4 OAC ones. Because he's been in First Love, Life Expectancy Part 3, and The Pilots, and then for OAC he's been in The Cures, and
the
this
launch.
one. He wasn't in the launch, they just mentioned him.
Oh, okay, never mind.
So 4 and 4. All right. Did you have more things before your final notes?
Let me think. There were some parts about this episode that, like, reminded me of, I want to say, an episode with Alex Jefferson, but I can't think of what it is, and I'm probably wrong in saying that. I don't know.
Missionary Impossible?
I don't think it was Missionary Impossible, though. So I'm probably wrong.
Okay.
Maybe we're just thinking of, like, Cal and Alex screaming at each other, and I'm just linking that with, like, Jason screaming at people in this episode. I don't know.
Perhaps.
I really liked the scenes between Jason and Frollo in this episode because I don't have anything else to call him.
Yeah, I didn't write his name down. All right.
So I think those were my favorite scenes in the episode. Also the Jeff scenes. Always the Jeff scenes.
For the documentary this time, the video is made up of an interview with an MAF pilot. So in case you didn't notice, this episode was tied with the missions organization MAF, which is Missions Aviation Fellowship. It's only mentioned 2 or 3 times, I think, in the episode.
How many missionary places is Jeff connected to?
A lot. I mean, this is a missionary organization focused exclusively on planes and flying people places. So.
That makes sense.
So this video is made up of an interview with an MAF pilot who is actually the pilot being interviewed is the father of T-Bone, who is one of those 2 kids who's always in the documentary videos, one of the OAC ambassadors. So I'm guessing that's probably how Focus found out about MAF and why they made this episode about it, because of that. So they talk to him. There's a look behind the Foley creation for Jason's fall out of the tree. And then
please tell me that they pushed someone out of a tree.
They did not. And then a look at a remote tribe in Papua called the Hoopla receiving Bibles in their language for the first time.
So we don't know where Papua is? And you're sure it's not New Guinea?
No, Papua New Guinea and Papua are different. Papua is this other half of the island from Indonesia.
That's really inconspicuous.
Papua New Guinea. So it's an island, and it's cut in half. Papua New Guinea is one side, and Papua is the other. Oh,
why don't they just call the entire thing Papua New Guinea?
Because they're different countries, Victoria. It's like saying, why don't... That's like Mexico, the U.S., and Canada are all on the same chunk of land. Why don't they just squish them together?
I'm sorry. Yeah, that is a thing. It's called North America, Devin.
North America's not a country, Victoria. Anyways,
I know it's not a country. I'm saying that those 3 places grouped together does have a name.
Yeah, but that's because it's a continent. So that's what's in the video. Not a lot to say about specific elements of the video, but for the WebQuest stuff after it. So MAF is actually a very old organization. Well, quite old. So in 1956, I can't remember I don't think they mentioned this in the episode, but they did in the documentary. In 1956, one of their pilots, Nate Saint, and 4 other missionaries landed in a village in Ecuador that they'd been dropping supplies and gifts to remotely for months, like drop them via parachute, Hunger Games style. And then when they finally landed in person, they were immediately killed by the villagers. And Nate's sister and other missionaries... What?
They were killed?
Yes. Nate's sister and other missionaries, instead of doing anything hateful, vengeful, or even angry at all, they returned to the same village and lived among those people for years and years, and eventually many of the people of the village were led to Christ. So, definitely a huge example of the love being talked about in this episode.
That'd be so awkward, though. It's like, oh, how did you learn about our village? Oh, we used to deliver things, and then you killed my brother.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, the dedication ceremony from the episode of handing the Bibles passed from elders to young people is inspired by a celebration by the Camille tribe that they did when they received their Bibles for the first time. Here's what I thought was a really cool story. So there was a couple that was ministering for years to the Walani in Papua, and the Walani believed that when twins were born, that the smaller one was an evil spirit of the larger one, and so they wouldn't let the smaller twin live, because they believed only one of them was like the real person. And then the missionaries that were there gave birth to twins, and after the people of the village saw the twins grow and just be normal people, and that, both of them were their own people and stuff, then a Walani couple finally had the courage to break tradition and let both of their twins live, and now the superstition is no more.
That's good.
Yeah.
It's really awkward because I have friends who are twins.
I think most of us know twins, Victoria.
And can you imagine, like, out of Jonathan and Riker seems, I don't know, more passive than Jonathan. Anyway.
I would say that, yeah. So, and then this month's OAC fees, which is June, the OAC fees from that month provided 65,000 vaccines to MAF for remote villages around the world.
That's a lot.
Yeah, so
I got a needle today, except for they took blood, not gave it.
That's not what vaccines are, but that's also true.
Vaccines have to do with needles.
Yes, but a vaccine isn't a blood transfusion.
I didn't get a blood transfusion.
I know, that's what you said. You said they took blood, not gave it. Giving blood is a blood transfusion.
I know.
Anyways. So,
did you ever hear my story about my blood transfusion? It happened at a ski lodge. It was really weird.
We're not getting into that.
It's the Alex show. It's Alex's show. It's not yours.
Trent show.
Come
on down and see the Trent show. I love how as that scene is fading out in Blood, Sweat, and Fears, that like just breaks character and you can hear him start cackling in his own voice, not the Wooten voice.
That always bothered me. I was always sitting there. I'm like, I'm glad Jess is having a fun time, but why did they leave that in the episode?
Yeah, I on one hand I like it, but it's also like it's not the right voice, so it's like
yeah.
Anyway, so my final thoughts on this. So I really like this episode. And I want to say this right off the bat. I think that the best thing this episode did is that it was short. Lately, we've had tons of missionary episodes with a lot of similarities, and they've all been 2+ parts each. This episode got out what it needed to do without a ton of fluff and filler, and I really appreciate that. Like, it just got to the point. That being said, I also really like that this is a topic that I've been thinking on a lot lately, so I was really glad to see it come up, which is being such a bright light of God's love that when non-believers look at us, then they say like, wow, there's no way this person could be this loving. No one could possibly be like this without supernatural interference. And there are lots of verses that talk about, being the light on a hill and letting God's light shine through us such that other people see him in us. But that's really hard. And we as Christians try and embody all these virtues and fruits of the Spirit. But on average, it is hard to get above the level of just being an average, really nice person. And the problem there is that there are lots of nice people out there who are Christian and lots of nice people out there who are not Christians. So to move up to the point where you're so filled with supernatural agape love that defies sense and logic, such that people know you and like that they know that only God can be how you are, the way that you are, that's something very difficult. And as you can tell, it's something that I've obviously been musing and praying about a lot lately, which is why I'm talking so much about it. So this episode provides an example of that kind of love. Not a terribly practical example, because it's not very likely to pop up in everyday life, but still, laying down one's life for another is the highest level of love, so it makes a prime example. Brings to mind a quote which has come up quite a lot in my life in the last couple of weeks from the famous one from St. Francis of Assisi, where he said, preach the gospel whenever possible, and if necessary, use words. Which is to say, if we're living Christ-filled lives, loving on people and filling their physical needs as best we're able, then our life will become our ministry, and people will want to hear from us what sets us apart, just like Connie and Cheryl at the end of Go Ye Therefore. So overall, I think this episode tackles an excellent and relevant subject. It does so very well and tells the story concisely without a ton of extra side stuff weighing down the plot. So, yeah, very good. The only detraction I have is that since this is supposed to be about MAF, it would have been nice to hear a little more about that, because it was only mentioned like 2 or 3 times, and they basically just said the name, and that was it. And that's all we got about that. I didn't know.
Well, at least this month had a ministry, so.
Yeah, that's true. So, those are my thoughts, and my final rating, I would place 4.4. Because it wasn't like, but yeah, it did a good job of what it was doing.
I'd say this is probably one of my favorite missionary episodes overall. I really enjoyed it. My favorite thing about it was definitely how they did the lesson, because I think they presented it really well. And they explained everything. They didn't go into over necessary detail. They didn't pull a cure and then they're like, hey, let's drop all these verses in everywhere we can. And it didn't have any fluff or filler. It got to the point. It did it well. It was one part, and everything that happened had a purpose. So, yeah. I really enjoyed it. And it had Jeff in it. So that's like an automatic 3, no matter what the episode is.
What's your rating for this one, Victoria?
So I would say I'm going to give it a 4.5.
All right. And I guess that's that. So, Wit's Flop is next. So that'll be interesting. So let's turn you over to that right now. And we're back now talking about episode 001, Wit's Flop, written by Phil Lawler and Steve Harris, originally airing, of course, November 21st, 1987.
This episode has Hal in it, Devin.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. It has Davy in it. It has Tom. It's been so long since I've listened to a Tom episode. It's been way too long.
Well,
I miss
Tom episode, I mean, it has like 20 lines from Tom. But
he has at least 2 lines. So
okay, so obviously before the episode even...
Connie and Eugene weren't even around yet.
Obviously, before the episode starts, there's stuff to address just in the nature of this episode. Obviously, this is a fairly, prominent review because this isn't just a review of Wit's Flop as an episode. It's the review of Wit's Flop as the first episode and as the beginning. We're going to be
highly critical on it.
So, I guess we'll just dive into it then. So, episode 1. There's obviously a lot to say here. And I feel like our review will probably not even come close to covering the full significance of things as they pertain to this being the first episode of the show. I suppose, of course, with reference to other shows,
we should say what the premise is first.
Oh, yeah, we should do that, too. I was going to say, with reference to other other series, it should be noted that this is not the pilot episode, because All of Family Portraits was the pilot for AIOO. Which is what makes it interesting how several of those episodes would later come back around and become canon episodes, though slightly changed usually. That's a good idea, Victoria. What happens in Wit's Flop?
So, in this episode, there is a boy named Davy Holcomb, and he is on the Coyotes' Little League team, which Tom Riley coaches. He's teased, and he doesn't do very good, and people pick on him. So, he decides he's not very good at anything. Wit decides to show him that he can be good at some things. And everything works out in the end, and he isn't teased anymore.
Did you realize the point of these descriptions is not to tease for the episode, it's to actually explain what happens in the episode,
I know, I'm kidding. So, Wit gets Davy to try and work on some inventions and see how that works. The invention doesn't really work out, so Davy claims that he's a failure. It turns out the invention actually does work, and it's the photocopier machine that later becomes the pizza maker. So in the end, Davy learns that he can be successful at things, and everyone apologizes to him. And that's the beginning of our series, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so the episode begins off with a vignette from Chris getting her plumbing fixed in her kitchen. So
the sound effects always bothered me when the plumbing came undone. Sounded slightly too cartoony for my taste.
Although, admittedly, plumbing sound effects do actually sound somewhat cartoony, more so than one might expect. But yeah, I know, still, I will grant you that, yeah.
Yeah. I know that, popping noises and, or whatever can, noises like that a lot. But still, it's clink, 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 bang, bang, bang.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
So, this set the stage for the next several years of episodes, which would often open and close on skits of varying lengths involving Chris doing things and talking to people, often within the context of her supposedly being in Odyssey, although she never once went to a location or spoke to a person who would ever appear in the actual show. Like, she never went to Wit's End or spoke to Jimmy Barkley or anything. Sorry?
Welcome to Wit's End.
Yeah.
Because that's totally canon. I like to think that Chris isn't, like, in an insane asylum and she's, like, wrapped up in a white coat and Odyssey's just her hallucinations. So then she's just, like, in her room and she's, like, screaming things about Wit's End. I've actually had this theory for probably about 10 years now.
That's very original, Victoria. I've never heard anyone make that theory about any other series before.
Shut up, Devin.
So, these skits would also often serve as a segue for the theme music, and there's a montage of a few of those at the beginning of the retrospective episode, The Adventure of the Adventure. So eventually the writers decided to stop making those scenes because they were becoming too elaborate or long, and it was just cutting too much into the actual episode as a result. So it's like, this episode isn't big enough for the both of us. So
even though they're really corny, my favorite ones were the ones with the doctor who, like, turned things into gold.
Julius Schnitzelwalker?
Yeah. And then, like,
I still can't believe they brought him back for BTV Live.
I know! It's like, of all the characters
that long
you could possibly bring back.
Well, Chuck Bolte was already there, so...
I know that's why they did it, but still, it's like, we have Chuck here, why don't we put George in? Why don't we put Julius Schnitzelwalker in? But... It's still really weird. I remember when we first listened to that, and we were in the car, and then he appeared, and we were just like, no, what? And then Mom and Dad were like, what's your problem? And we're like, it's the guy. It's, oh my god.
So, as we move on to the episode beginning, so I always think it's interesting how Tom has the first scene, basically the first line of Adventures in Odyssey. There's one line before where it's like, strike three, you're out, but I don't think that really counts. So,
we should find out who that unnamed guy is and credit him with being the first person in all of Odyssey.
Well, technically it would be Chris anyways, so.
True.
So Tom has this first scene without Whit and outside of Whit's End, so I always thought that was interesting. And so we see Davy Holcomb. So the early episodes of this show always featured one-off kid characters who would never appear again on the show, with the exceptions of Davy Holcomb in this episode, who later showed up 40 albums later in Stars in Our Eyes.
Because that totally counts.
Yeah, and Monty Whitaker Dowd, who showed up again because he was Whit's grandson, obviously, is going to come back.
And the first regulars were the Barkleys and Lucy and Jack.
Yeah. So Davy and Monty were both for specific reasons. I don't think they really count. So other than them, the first kid characters, as you said, to appear, who would return again, were Jack Davis and Lucy Cunningham Schultz, who appeared in Rumor Has It, episode 29. And then 2 episodes later is when the Barkleys first appeared in Family Vacation. So, Davies, never having been to Whit's End before, allowed Whit to give him a tour of the shop, and us, as the audience, got a tour by extension. I've always thought that this was somewhat clever. Certainly a lot smoother than Whit's Visitor, where Whit delivers a whole, 20 minutes of exposition to the audience directly through the fourth wall.
He's talking about, Pie and Jenny.
Directly through the fourth wall. Yeah. I suppose many shows probably do the same thing that this one did like that, but it's always reminded me specifically of Level 1-1 of Mario, which is probably the cleverest video game tutorial ever devised, because there is no tutorial for it. Every single block and power-up an enemy in that level is designed to force the player to teach themselves the mechanics by stumbling upon them. Like the Goombas are in places such that when you try and jump over them, you'll hit the block above and land on their heads and learn that kills them. And when the mushroom power-up first starts coming towards you, it's in a way that there's blocks overhead all the way back, so you can't run back. You're trapped there with the mushroom. And so it has to hit you, and then you're like, oh, it's a power-up, not an enemy. So it's things like that. So I've always thought it was extremely clever. Something that, doesn't get done anymore. And that reminds me of this, which isn't entirely relevant or analogous, but whatever.
This is, classic storytelling trope, kind of. You have the newbie, and then you have to teach them the ropes.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You see this
I'm crediting it, but it is, a very classic trope, but whatever. It's a good trope, pointing though. It works really well. Yeah, it is the most obvious way to deliver exposition for the beginning of a series. So, you know what? There you go. That's
introduce a new character in a new situation, and then
the audience
you like
learns at
give
the same
them a
time as
tour of
them.
everything, and then you can relate to the main character, so you can like if the main character is super relatable, then you can kind of like put yourself in their shoes, and then you have the same feelings towards all the other characters, so then you grow closer to them faster.
It happens in just about everything, but whatever. I'm pointing out its existence here.
I'm not trying to say anything against your point.
I know. I'm saying it against, but
I'm right, though. You can't say I'm wrong about that.
This episode has always overwhelmingly convinced me that Whit has absolutely no idea how a photocopier works. Like, at all. Because I've learned about how photocopiers work. And, like...
Well, that's why the photocopier wasn't working in the first place.
I know, but he put a light bulb inside. He's like, I never could get the picture part to work, right? And I was like, they like scan the light, and the light's used to polarize the surface to like polarize ink toner so that it can be rolled off onto a page of paper as ink. Like it's like
you look so confused.
I don't know if he was.
Now.
He must know that that's not how photocopiers do work, so I don't know if he was trying to reinvent the wheel and come up with a better photocopier by making an easy bake oven.
See, I always thought he was trying to come up with a new way of making a photocopier.
By, like, putting a camera inside. Because the way he describes it makes it sound like he literally just wanted to put a camera inside a box and then have it print out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's not how photocopiers work. I love how he builds all these inventions that take you to like different places in time inside your mind and like possible future outcomes and different timelines. And then it's just like, oh, can you make a photocopier? I'm sorry.
Puts a light bulb in a box, yeah.
And it's like, okay, here, take it. I'd like to think that when Eugene started working there, like the first thing he did was he like saw the blueprints for that or something, and he's like, Mr. Whitaker, what is this? And he's like, this is my photocopier. And Eugene's like, okay.
Yeah, shoving ice cream cones into his purse. I need to go right now. Find another internship. Uh-huh.
And he's like, I can't say anything bad about him. He just hired me.
Yeah. Speaking of Whit's inventions, I always find it, like, I love Whit's modesty when Davey asks him about them. Because he's like, I didn't know you're an inventor. And Whit's like, well, I guess it depends who you ask. I'm like, Whit, you're a major programming consultant for the Department of Defense and Homeland Security. Stop with the false modesty.
I didn't know you're an inventor. It depends on who you ask. Oh, you go to Wit's End. Wit's End isn't that exciting. It's like people brushing off things so much. It's like, have fun, darn it, you're in Odyssey. You're in the coolest place ever.
Yeah. And then after the episode ends, if you're listening to the Gold Audio Series version, there's a bonus feature. I can't even say explaining family portraits. It basically just says family portraits is a thing, and it had Whit in it, and that led to AIOO, and that's about all the explaining it does. These bonus features like 30 seconds long.
That's what most sequels do with the movies that come before them. If you don't watch it, it's mostly like, oh yeah, this happened and it was bad, but now everything's okay. And then everyone's like, oh, okay, let's go on a new adventure then. Let's brush that off.
So I obviously don't have a lot of notes for the body of this episode, as you just noticed, but I can certainly say a lot more about the episode as a whole. First, I'll go over a couple like bonus things about it. Did you have any more things about specific instances in the episode you wanted to say first?
It always kind of freaked me out, and like, I don't know, it always kind of bothered me when Davey, it's like, he gets upset after he tries to fix it and it doesn't work, and then he's like, oh, I'm good for nothing, and then he runs out, and then Witch is like, Davey, come back here right now.
He does sound rather aggressive.
And I'm like, I'm so scared right now.
I did notice that earlier today. It is quite aggressive.
Every single time I listen to it, it scares me so badly, and I'm just like, Hal, you're scaring me, please, no. And I can't listen to that part. It like freaks me out every time I listen to it. That's probably one of the big reasons that I don't like this episode as much as some of the other ones. Because like, it's like Whit, he wants a little bit of time to be alone. Just give him a little bit of time to be alone and then go to him. Instead, he's just like, Davey, you come back here or else. And then I do really like the resolution of this episode. How, like, Whit, he's like, oh, playing games with Davy's mind, kind of. And then he's just like, oh, here, upset, have some pizza, have some comfort food. And Davy's just like, I hate my life so much.
He didn't
I'll never achieve anything. I'm a failure.
Whit,
I bet I can't even cook food properly. And Whit's like, eat more pizza.
Whit didn't realize, though, that Davy didn't know that was the pizza from the oven.
Really?
Yeah, right? Because he goes by and he's like, pizza? What does he mean? And Whit's like, oh, yeah, that's like this thing. Like, I don't think it was intended to be
I always thought he was
deceptive.
Like teasing him.
I don't think so.
And he's like, oh, yeah, by the way, you're a genius, didn't you know? And he's just like, what? And Whit's like,
I thought it was just Whit figured it was obvious to Davy because he built a pizza oven. He demonstrated the pizza oven. 5 minutes later, people go by with pizza saying, hey, Davy, nice pizza. And Whit probably thought, well, this is probably pretty obvious. I don't think I need to spell this out to him.
And Davy's like, what's going on? And Whit's just like... And then Davy's just like, hey, don't call me stupid. You're the one who put a light bulb in a box.
Touche.
And, yeah, I don't know. I always thought Whit was doing that thing, kind of, where, like...
That Whit thing.
Someone's just like, you're being modest or something like that. And you're just like, oh, yeah, I just did this and this. Except for it was for Davy, though. And then he's just kind of be like, oh, yeah, it's just, you did great at this or something. Because, like, tons of people have done that before.
Done what, sorry?
Like,
Build
a
an
kind
easy
of
bake
thing
oven?
where... No, I mean, like, say you get a really good test mark or something like that. And then you come home and then you're like, hey, what's up? And they're just like, oh, I was just reading about this test mark someone did really good on. Look at this. And you're like, oh my gosh, and stuff. And then they're like, yeah, high five.
I see.
I always thought it was that kind of thing. Know what I mean?
Yes. I don't think that's it. But yeah, but I mean, really, the oven is, like, that's what it is. It's an easy bake oven. It's a box with a light bulb inside, and it heats up food with a light bulb.
It's like, I just don't know what went wrong.
Basically. Okay, so some behind-the-scenes stuff. So first we have stuff from the guide. So, behind the scenes, Whit's Flop was the first Odyssey USA episode and the first Focus on the Family daily broadcast drama program that aired in its own time slot. In this show, listeners got a short tour around Whit's End, and we introduced the train station, the Inventor's Corner, Whit's Workshop, and the displays. And then, Goof Alert. In Whit's Flop, Whit says that Davy knocking over the backstop was a coincidence. However, it's clear from later episodes, such as A Single Vote and others, that Whit does not believe in coincidences. And I should point out, that's not really a goof, because it's,
Yeah.
It's kind of different senses of the word. When Whit said, like, that was a coincidence, he was saying it wasn't Davy's fault that the backstop fell over. When he's saying he doesn't believe in coincidences, he's saying, like, I believe that God works through everything that happens with purpose. So it's not really the same thing entirely. So it's not really a goof, even though it's usually touted as one.
Davy's just like, I'm a failure. And Whit's like, no, you're not. And he's like, that was just a coincidence. Tom comes up behind him. I thought you didn't believe in coincidences, Whit. And Davy starts crying and runs away. And Whit's like, Davy, come back here right now.
Davy, come back.
Davy, come back.
Okay, version differences. I thought this was interesting. I didn't know about this before, and this is from AIOO Wiki. In the opening wraparound of the original Odyssey USA version, Chris shows different examples of failure, including a boy trying to spell soliloquy, which is fair, it's a hard word to spell. At the end of the episode, apparently you can hear this in official podcast 31. At the end of the episode, Chris advertises a book called Abraham Lincoln and Clubhouse Magazine. She also offers a free cassette to listeners, and a preview for episode 2, The Life of the Party, is also heard. Chris signs off with her signature line, I hope you spend some time exploring our side of the radio next week in Odyssey, USA.
Adventures. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Before the name change.
Yeah. 22 episodes later. The complete guide lists Phil Lawler as Sally's father in this episode. This is probably a reference to the father and daughter who appear in the spelling bee in the introduction to the Odyssey USA version. However, the girl in the introduction is not identified as Sally. So, just script things, I guess. Starting with the second broadcast on September 24th, 1988, the episode begins with Chris talking to a plumber. All references to Odyssey USA were also removed. So I guess they made that new intro there then. That was only the second time the episode ever aired, so that original beginning only happened the first airing ever. And then all other...
I mean, like, that makes sense, because they did a new episode every single week.
Exactly. So by the time the rerun came around, 10 months later, the show had already become Adventures in Odyssey, and so they had to redub all that stuff.
How did reruns work in Odyssey? I always wondered that. Like, how long was it till they're like, okay, we've created this many episodes,
I don't know.
Do a rerun.
They have the schedules of all broadcasts ever on AIOO Wiki.
I don't want to look at the broadcast schedule.
Yeah, so I don't know. But I mean, presumably this was the first episode that was ever reran, right? So I guess September 24th, 1988, probably.
My hair looks very soft today.
Here's something interesting. It says, several minutes of the episode were later removed after the first Adventures in Odyssey revision, presumably to make Odyssey's first episode faster paced. Also, the scene where Davy turns on the first version of his pizza oven now includes a different sound effect. So apparently there are several more minutes that were only in the first version, which makes me wonder if Official Podcast 31 has that full original version, since it says it has that beginning to it. I can't remember. It's been a long time.
Let me just tell you guys at Odyssey this. You removed a couple minutes to make this episode faster paced. This episode isn't that fast paced.
Well, yeah, but just imagine how it was before then.
Yeah, I know. So.
Okay, so...
I mean, it's not like incredibly slow, but it is kind of a dry episode.
Yes, okay, wait. Final thoughts. I don't have a lot of notes for the body of this episode, but I can certainly say more about the episode as a whole as it pertains to the rest of the series. Now, I know that Victoria and I can both say a lot, or at least a fair amount, about pilot episodes and how they measure up to the rest of their series and how they should...
In fact, I was going to talk about that in a minute.
And how they should measure up to the rest of their series, etc. Although, as I said earlier, this isn't technically a pilot episode. It is still the first episode of the show. Here, you can... I did first thoughts last time. I want to hear what you have to say first.
I'm going to count this as a pilot episode.
Yeah.
So, I have so many different opinions on pilot episodes. I have so much to say about pilot episodes. I talk everyone's ear off whenever they mention pilot episodes. So I have a rule of thumbs.
Rule of thumb?
My rule... Singular? Whatever. I have two thumbs, so I can call... My rule of thumbs is I can name my rules what I want to, Devin.
Okay.
So I never judge a series by its pilot episode unless there are some where you're just like, okay, I'm not going to like this regardless of where it goes. So whenever I start a new series, I actually make a list of series where I like the pilot episodes. Out of every single series I've ever seen, there are only 8 series on this list. So like Once Upon a Time, Fairy Tale, Devil is a Part-Timer, Gravity Falls, Ouran High School Host Club, Grimm, Sword Art Online, and Akagami no Shirayuki, and Kami-sama Kiss. So that's 9, actually. So I always make myself listen to more than the pilot episode, because the pilot episode is never as... it's never going to be as good as the other ones, usually. And the reason for that, I think, is pilot is kind of like testing the water, see what you can and can't get away with, see what people react to positively, see what makes them happy, what makes them laugh, or whatever you're going for in your series.
There's also the fact that a pilot episode usually, depending on the genre, mostly has to dump a lot of exposition out, and that takes a lot of time, especially in series like Fairy Tale, where you have, fantasy or sci-fi or stuff like that. You have to dump all this exposition at the beginning to make things make sense. Hopefully not as awkwardly as Fairy Tale, but...
Except for Fairy Tale and Once Upon a Time both have very exposition-heavy first episodes, and they're both on my favorite episodes list.
Yeah, but I'm saying
they just did it in a way that worked really, really well, in my opinion.
It's just a general thing that usually you have to devote time, like, disproportionately heavily in the first episode to start explaining the world of your thing, and depending on how different that is from the real world is going to determine how much stuff you have to explain, how much time you're going to have to devote to that, which can be a problem if you have to spend your whole episode explaining the whole universe that your thing's taking part in. In this episode, it's not that bad. Most of that kind of exposition-y stuff is relegated just to explaining like what Wit's End is and stuff, which doesn't take up very much here.
Yeah, in lots of series, what they do, and what they also do in this series, is they kind of like start in on the action right away. Like they just hit the ground running. So they don't bother wasting time on like lots of exposition. They're not like, oh, this is Wit's End, this is Chicago, this is Universal Press, this is Connellsville.
Now Blackguard.
Blackguard, Jeff Lewis. So they don't waste time on any of that. What they do is they give you the bare essentials. They tell you this is Wit, this is Wit's End, this is Tom. He invents stuff. Go, basically. So then as the episodes go on, lots of other series do this, they just give you the bare essentials. And then as time goes on, they explain more things to you and they give you more backstory. Heck, we're over 700 episodes in to Odyssey and we're still learning backstory.
For our main character,
like, same thing with Fairy Tale and like other tons of other series that are still ongoing. Like, and that's, in my opinion, I'm not saying stories that don't do this are bad, but that's a sign of good storytelling. Just because the pilot isn't as good as some of the other episodes, like the pilot, if something doesn't work, that just gives you a point to just get better as it goes. So that's why whenever you start a new series, you're probably going to hear from lots of people like, oh, the pilot's not that good, or like, once you get to this episode, it's going to be like really, really good, and just jump start, basically. So, in my opinion, the pilot should never be your judgment of whether the rest of the series is good or not. It's just the starting point. It shouldn't really even count that much.
Yeah, I
mean, it does factor into things, but don't base your entire judgment on how the pilot is.
Yeah, I thought about, like, you look at, I wouldn't really put Doctor Who probably in my top 3 fandoms anymore, I feel like. I feel like it'd be like 5 or lower now, but I mean, if I take...
Oh, are you talking about in fandoms or pilot episodes?
Fandoms.
Okay, because Doctor Who pilot...
No, that's what I'm saying. My 3 top series, if Doctor Who was still in there, like, all 3 of them have, like, Adventure pilot, Wit's Flop is kind of... Doctor Who's pilot is, like... and Homestuck's first act, personally, I really like because I had such low expectations. But I mean, if lots of people can't get through it because of Act 1 of Homestuck, because they're like, oh, I don't like this, So, I mean, yeah, I
had some difficulty getting through the first act of Homestuck, honestly.
Sorry?
I had some difficulty getting through the first act of Homestuck.
Victoria's certainly, obviously, spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of pilot episodes and what they should and shouldn't be.
I spent way too much time. Way too much time that's healthy.
And, I obviously thought about it a little bit, too, mostly just as we were preparing for this review. And just kind of thinking, what should a pilot episode be? Because there's really 2 main ways you can go for a pilot episode. Either you can make it really flashy and exciting off the bat and trying to start it on a high note, and then, kind of explain more things as you go on from there, or you can make it representative of the show overall as it's going to be. And there's positives and negatives to both. If you make it really exciting and a high exciting start point, then you're going to draw lots of people in from the first episode, but then people are going to notice, like, suddenly there's a decline and they're going to feel, like, deceived and like, oh, the show's not as good as it used to be, and leave it.
That's happened to me with some of the pilot shows I mentioned on my list for really good first pilots. The first episode was really good, but the other ones weren't, so I don't actually watch that show anymore. But my rule is, since it has a good first pilot, I will always have respect for it, so it still stays on the list. Like Grimm, I don't really like Grimm very much, but the first episode was really good. So.
And then, on the other hand, if you have an episode where it's like, man, this is like, the episode is very representative of what the show to come is, people know what they're getting in for, but you're also probably going to hook less people than if you start with something like really cinematic and crazy. So Wit's Flop is obviously the second, and honestly, it does do a good job at being the second, because while this episode, it's not especially exciting or funny or emotional or anything like that, it's pretty mediocre in all aspects, but as a baseline template, it's quite representative of the average slice of life episode. We have some kid and they have some kind of dilemma, and they go to Whit's end, and they talk to Whit, and then Whit does these object lessons and stuff, and builds them up, and teaches them, a lesson from the Bible, and then, at the end of the day, they're like, okay, I understand this now, and my problem is fixed, or will be fixed as a result.
But the best thing about Odyssey is it's not as, like, standard, clear-cut, as dry as that. That's why I stopped watching Grimm, actually, because every single episode had the same format. It always started with a crime scene, and then it turned out to be, like, some kind of grim fairy tales monster causing it, and then it always wrapped up at the end.
Yeah.
Every single episode of Grimm was like that. I watched over a season, and every single thing was the same. That's why I didn't keep on watching it.
That's what Sean's complaint with Doctor Who was, too. He's like, I know everything's going to wrap up the end, but they go to some planet, there's a problem with aliens, it fixes at the end of the episode, they go somewhere else. So, I mean... But
Doctor Who isn't always like that, though.
It's not always, but it is
I think the best example for a pilot episode I've ever seen is probably Ouran High School Host Club, because it's a slice of life series, and then the first episode's very slice of life, not anything too crazy.
Twist.
But the best thing is the episode ends with a plot twist, and that makes you have to watch the whole episode over again, and it changes everything. I personally think the best pilot episodes have plot twists at the end. Fairy Tale also does this, but
not as good as Ouran does.
Not as good as Ouran, because
that blew my mind when I watched the first episode.
The unfortunate thing I had going into Ouran was I knew what the plot twist was going into it.
Yeah.
Thing for Devin is he didn't know. So when he told me he was going to start watching it, I hadn't watched the show, but I was just like, oh yeah, I know about that show.
Anyways, I was going to say this isn't an ad for Ouran, but it should be because it's a fantastic show. Read the manga too, because the show only got one season, but the manga is 73 chapters and it's fantastic. Such a good series.
It's 83.
It's the height of,
83 chapters.
It's the height of shoujo anime / manga.
I have all the books on my shelf. Go read it.
Yeah, break into our house. Go read it from Victoria's room. Anyways, so yeah, Odyssey as a series is, I feel, as a baseline template, is fairly well represented in Whit's flop in the structure of the show. Now, for the humor and the drama and the excitement and other things, is not represented in Whit's Flop, because Whit's Flop is a fairly dreary kind of episode, but in terms of understanding what the structure and idea of the series is, I think it does that well. Now, as you said, there's a ton of variety, and this show does so many different genres, so many different formats of episodes, but overall, slice of life is probably the most common thing in the show, and the most common idea for the slice of life episodes is this baseline of, kid has a problem, and then Whit helps them work through that problem. So, I feel like you know what you're getting in for, and it will get better from there, which might be the best way to do a pilot for a show. So in that respect, it does all right. Mm-hmm. Overall,
and
oh, sorry, you can say more. I was going to give my rating.
I just want to interject. The episode never really made me laugh comedy-wise, but there is one moment that always kind of gets a smile out of me at least. When, the baseball team comes in, and it's like, oh, sorry, GLaDOS, I gotta go. A wild pack of coyotes just came in. And then on the other end, she's like, what, coyotes? And he's like, oh, no, it's the baseball team. And she's like, what? And then he, hangs up on her, basically. And then, why do they, howl? It's so weird. And he's like, you guys want some smoothies? Oh! And then Whit's just standing there. He's like, okay, I'll give you smoothies if you stop howling.
I'm not going to try to understand the relationship between people and sports. That's not something we need to take the time to try and figure out here.
Good point.
So overall, between comparing this as an episode and as a representative pilot for the entire, the next 770 episodes plus. I'm going to give it 3.5.
I'm going to mark it on 2 scales. I'm going to mark it as a pilot, and then I'm going to mark it as an episode.
Okay. And then make a cumulative mark together. You can average them, or I'll average them.
Fine. I'll let you help me average it. So as a pilot episode, all things considered, I think I'd give it a 4. Because I think it's a pretty good way to start your series. You have a good concept, good idea, and then you just go with it. And they did it in a good way. They didn't overhype anything, and
that's for sure.
Everything we just said. There was nothing to overhype. We put a light
There was
bulb
no
in
exaggeration.
a box.
No embellishment in this episode.
Yeah, you have likable characters, and you have a nice environment.
You have likable characters, and you'll meet 2 of them again.
What about Chris?
Oh, that's true.
What about that plumber? He was pretty memorable. What was his name? I'm serious, what was his name?
Plumber.
Randy?
Oh yeah, he did have a name, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
I think so. Let me...
You don't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Anyway, as an episode, I think I'd give it a 2.3 out of 5. I think that's pretty generous of me.
What was your rating, sorry?
So, 2.3 out of 5 is an episode,
2.3.
and 4 out of 5 is a pilot.
Okay.
So what would that average be?
So 2.3 and 4 is 6.3, so 3.15.
Okay, so 3.15 is nice math. I'm just gonna trust that you're right and you're not
I'm always right with math.
Pulling that out of nowhere. So yeah. So all in all, go watch Oron. Right now.
Alright, and I guess that's our review.
That's our review of Oron High School Host Club, everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so what are we doing next time, Victoria?
So next time is... book?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. I don't have it with me.
I do.
I put it back a couple days ago. You have yours?
Yeah.
It's not going to be like a couple episodes ago when I gradually pulled it up and you shook your head and I just put it back down.
Yes, we're going to be doing a book review. We are going to be reviewing Adventures in Oddity, which is, of course, the book that Katie and Will wrote together not too long ago about their experiences independently and together, both on Odyssey and in other professional life. So they wrote this book. We both bought it. I have copy number 4. There's the camera. Number 4 autograph. There. Yes, it's very exciting. So we're going to be talking about that next time. And of course, this is...
Katie and Will sound like very nice people. It'd be nice to meet them. But fortunately... or unfortunately, we'll never have that chance.
Yeah, this is definitely...
Wink.
We did not do this
Wink.
in preparation for the interview, which we've already mentioned previously on this podcast.
What interview, Darvin?
So,
Wink.
this is coming up next time, and then 2 more episodes after that, you're going to get the actual interview with Katie, Leigh, and Will Ryan. So, on that exciting note, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube. This has been Devin Francis.
And this has been I Spend Too Much Time Thinking About Pilot Episodes.
And you've been watching...
I have a problem.
You've been watching...
The Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast.
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 Goodbye.
Bye.